Hello, my name is Valerie Haven, and I want to welcome all of you to my third capstone presentation. The title of my capstone is Nothing About Us Without Us, Developing a New Emergency Response Model for People with Disabilities During Active Shooter Incidents. The phrase Nothing About Us Without Us comes out of the disability rights movement from the past 20 years. And what it basically means is that people should be directly involved in policy setting or any procedures that will benefit them or direct them in a particular way. So part of what I'll be doing as I move along through my presentation is talking about not just people with disability, but people at risk. By way of introduction, I want to describe briefly the theoretical framework I'll be using to develop my thesis. The framework is called Synergistic Learning Theory. It was developed by three Chinese engineers who took the engineering principle of synergy and applied it to education. In their model, there are three actors in an educational event. There's the professor, the learners, and technology. So these particular gentlemen describe what they're talking about as that in every action of education, people need to be free to express themselves and to learn in whatever format works for them best. So in the synergistic learning model, the three actors, the professor, the students, and the technology, come together in a gestalt of education and blend in a way that creates something new and different. But it's important to remember that all three of these components are needed in order to have a synergistic event occur. Today I'll be discussing the location of my research and who I hope will benefit from it. I will be going through some of the primary sources that I located for my work. I'll be discussing the format that I plan on using and then go into my literature review. I'll be describing briefly some of the main documents I found that I plan to use as primary sources, and then conclude with some remarks about a few of the barriers that I think may come up and how I intend to resolve them. I will be doing my research at the Boston Harbor campus where I work. This is an inner city campus. We're located in Dorchester, Massachusetts. Right now, we're educating approximately 20,000 students from all walks of life. We also have a very large international contingent attending our school. The campus is under construction. We have a 25-year building plan. We're in about year 5. 3 of the buildings are up and operational, but 9 more have to be built. So what needs to be taken into consideration regarding this location is the fact that we have streams of people coming in and out every day. That changes according to the conferences and other events that we hold as well as classes. There are mounds of dirt everywhere. There's large pieces of machinery. They keep changing the roads about every 3 months, along with the transportation pathways like the walking pathways. They are not finished with a lot of their parking. There's a great deal going on, and we'll be doing this for quite a while. In addition to that, we are also in financial debt. I think it's probably because of the construction project. But what that's doing is that the campus community is also already under a lot of stress. They there's been a lot of people that have been laid off. Costs are going up. They closed our daycare, so we have to work out something else for our employees with children and also our students with children. So there's already a very tense and uncomfortable situation going on the campus, and it's in some ways really primed for a possible active shooter incident. We have never had one, but we have had some major disasters. 2 years ago, we had a student commit suicide by jumping over the top railing in the building where I work. He actually fell to his death about 10 feet from the front door of my office. So this campus community has been under some strain, but they have yet to experience a full-blown incident. And because of the changing dynamics of the community, I don't know that we're able to really prepare as effectively as I think we would like to do. Our campus is very diverse. We have students attending from different cultural, racial, linguistic, and economic backgrounds. We have students of different ages, and we have a very large contingent of international students that attend our school. We hold both undergraduate and graduate classes, and our campus is situated in between Boston Harbor and a major highway. Along with classes, the campus offers opportunities for conferences, weddings, social events, sometimes political rallies. So the campus is open and full pretty much all year round. And we have a constant flow of people moving back and forth to the campus every day. Even though we just opened a dormitory, the majority of our students are commuter students. And so our community changes constantly, and we don't have a stable core of people that are there at one time. People with disabilities, as well as others at risk, have been injured or killed during active shooter events. Active shooter events occur in public places most of the time. They can be in public schools, shopping malls, theaters, restaurants. They often happen where there are large gatherings of individuals. One example of a young child, a 7-year-old girl with autism, was killed during the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, and there were several people with disabilities who died during the 9/11 World Trade Center attack. There's not that much evidence that people with disabilities have been injured or killed during active shooter events, but there's a great deal of evidence to indicate that there have been instances where police during other events have either injured or killed people with disabilities. Can we use technology to provide people with disabilities and others at risk real-time information about active shooter incidents in ways that will help them make decisions about their safety and communicate with first responders effectively? Everyone in the community will benefit. Remember that 20 to 30% of the American population has one or more disabilities. So by providing tools that people with disabilities and others at risk can use to make decisions about their safety and survivability, the entire community will be safer and have more opportunities to stay alive. One of the things I'm most interested in investigating are the underlying assumptions that first responders and other emergency support people may have regarding people with disabilities and individuals at risk. Uh, Disability tends to be a low incident issue in the United States, and many people do not have direct relationships with people with disabilities, so they don't have a lot of understanding of people's needs or the most appropriate way to support them. I suspect that first responders use their community and family assumptions that they've learned over time to make decisions about how to support people at risk. My main research goal is to investigate and develop a toolkit suite that will support all of the people involved in an active shooter incident, whether they are at risk or they have a disability, or if they just are a person that feels that they can handle a situation, whether they're a first responder or not. We know that active shooter incidents are highly chaotic. We have a little bit of information about them, but as we all know, it can change from minute to minute. So to be able to find a support system and develop it in a way that everyone in the community could use it as efficiently as possible to meet their needs and to support not only their own safety, but the safety of the people around them is my primary goal for this research. Some secondary goals include investigating new emergency management apps, find out what safety apps are accessible and how to use them, and also to begin developing a training program so that people can look at these options and craft a support system for themselves. I'm planning on looking at first apps that are in common use in the dominant society before I look at the ones that are grounded in assistive technology. My main goal is to design a tabletop exercise that will help people not only become more familiar with some of the issues of people at risk being involved in uh, active shooter incidents, but also to use it as a training tool, something that can be packaged easily and can be used as a springboard to open up conversation and to give some guidance to organizations as they craft their own toolkit suites. So my intention is for people to be able to use the research I locate in an open-ended way so that they can own it for themselves and they will be able to support their own communities. Obviously, one of the things that I hope this will be as a goal is that people will learn more about who the people at risk are in their communities and have become aware of more information of the organizations in their neighborhoods that can help you and other emergency managers to create more of a web of support for the whole area. Including people with disabilities into emergency management procedures is a fairly new area of investigation. Because of this, there are not that many foundational documents that I'm able to use for research. A couple that are important to see are the ones from the California Governor's Office after the 2015 shooting of an agency for people with intellectual disabilities. It's interesting to me that this particular document, they say over and over again that the intention of the shooting was not to harm any of the people with intellectual disabilities. I don't know how they can know that. I think it's more that the shooter was angry about being fired. But this is a good document because it is the first peer-reviewed document that I'm aware of that addresses specifically how to deal with people with disabilities, those at risk, and active shooter incidents. Some other very well done documents are the research on the 9/11 World Trade attack and also the New Mexico Governor's Office and their Disability Services Office also did an all hazards paper. What I like about this is that the paper started to look at bioterrorism, and they realized very quickly that they needed to go to an all hazards approach. Because they did that, they began to discover a new way of presenting the whole community literature that we have been studying. And they're the ones that discuss the possibility of getting involved with the local service organizations and other support systems that are in place in a community, because not only do people not know where the people with disabilities are located, many people with disabilities don't want to be identified that particular way and may not come to a center even if there's a crisis going on. Another option is the Red Cross. So as I began to do my research, I was hitting my head up against the wall because I just wasn't finding anything regarding emergency management and disability. Eventually, I turned to looking at the medical field and emergency response. There's a lot of literature there, but my concern is that everything that I looked at, as much as it talks about supporting people at risk, they're coming from the perspective of responding and dealing with mitigation. Uh, a lot of the literature that I was able to locate initially were journal articles and newspaper clippings and YouTube videos and television clips on police activity and people with disability or people at risk. This is what I'm going to be using to justify my work uh, to show that people have been harmed by first responders. What I want to say here is that I believe that first responders don't necessarily know much more about people with disability than the general population does. So it's understandable that they may be reacting from their personal framework, and that is concerning to me. I divided my research into four main components. The first component is evaluating the foundational documents from federal agencies such as Homeland Security and the FBI. The second one is for nonprofit organizations and private organizations such as the Red Cross. Guidance developed by people with disabilities and those at risk themselves. And then finally, the synergistic learning theory material. So the Homeland Security has very little information on its website. It does affirm that it's going to align itself with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. The FBI has the famous Run, Hide, Fight training, which is very controversial within the disabled community because, first of all, the language is not helpful. In addition to that, there's are no images of people with disabilities or minority groups. Well, actually, there may be minority groups, but there are no people with disabilities in the video, and the guidance encourages people to shelter in place until someone comes to get them. The third area is what is coming from the disabled community itself. So there's a couple of great things. There's one, which is actually a blog, where a disabled man talks about developing what's known as a survivor protector role. And this would be someone else who is in the experience with you that agrees beforehand to support you in evacuating or in whatever way that he or she can to either leave or to shelter somewhere. The Red Cross and some of the other nonprofit organizations, this is where the medical and the public health information comes in, insofar as what it means to support people with disabilities within the medical model. And I'll be talking about that more fully in my paper. And then finally, the synergistic learning theory framework that I'll be using to develop my new toolkit. So I'm going to be continuing doing research as I develop my paper more. I have to look outside the box basically because I'm looking for something that I know is there, but it's hidden under something. So however that ends up, these will be the forming categories that I'm starting with, and we'll be using these categories to assess the research. Evaluating the baseline data has been fascinating for me, partly because of what I just said a few minutes ago about being creative and in locating my research. But where the research has led me is to be clear about what the definitions are that I'll be using. So I decided after a lot of research that I'm going to be using the definition of people at risk from the Center for Disease Control. The center's definition is a lot more open than many of the definitions of disability because it includes people with disabilities, people who are homeless, people with English as a second language, people from different economic areas, senior citizens, and children. I had said in an earlier presentation that definitions of disability change according to the applications in which they're used. My example that I gave before is that the Social Security Administration defines someone as having a disability if their disability interferes with them getting a job and earning income. When a person with a disability succeeds in achieving a certain level of income, Social Security changes the category and they remain, they have, like in my case of being blind, so I still say blind, but because I'm earning enough income that went past their bottom line, I am now no longer regarded to be disabled by Social Security. So in the medical model, that changes. So to have this option from the Center for Disease Control is very useful. And along with that is taking a look at definitions of first responder and eventually taking a look at how they're trained and how decisions are made in an active shooter incident response. I will be using the documents from the federal agencies as my primary sources. I chose to do this because of the fact that this is where the main guidance is coming from on how to respond during active shooter incidents. I may use a few of the documents that are coming from Canada and some of the other European countries because they're doing slightly different work, but I haven't decided about this yet, and I'm going to be talking to my advisor about it. My feeling at the moment is to stay with the federal documents from within the United States only. The most difficult part of my research process was trying to find a path to investigate in terms of researching documents. Since this is a fairly new area of study, there's a lot about the health aspects of supporting people at risk, but very little, as I said, on national security or emergency management. So I've spent most of my research time following leads by just looking at the footnotes in different articles and trying to find some peer-reviewed work. There is a little bit, as I said, but for the most part, I will be creating a foundational document of my own because of the fact that there's not enough research published yet to really make a cohesive case. I'm going to be using probably the articles and the other web documents that I talked about, which are secondary documents, but it helped to make my case. I set my research parameters to work exclusively with higher education. There is a great deal of literature for elementary schools and active shooter incidents, but the response parameters and the needs of the children along with the teachers is very different than what would be happening in higher education. In terms of deciding which groups and categories of disability that I want to work with, I've been encouraged to work with only physical disabilities, which would be something like blind people, deaf people, people who are in wheelchairs. But I decided in the end to include in my parameters people with learning and intellectual disabilities. The reason I decided to add this group is because the largest single category of disability in the country at this time are people with learning and intellectual disabilities. I will be using the synergistic learning theory framework for my methodological framework. I'll be using it in a similar way to a SWOT, where I'll be pointing out how this framework can be useful when evaluating an active shooter event and incident, and to be able to look at how well uh, technology is going to be able to alert and help people to decide what their actions will be. In terms of the technology itself, I'll be making an analysis of what I look at, and I will be choosing first to look at the apps that are in common use in American society, and then I'll be going to the ones that are more specific to disability. I will be doing qualitative analysis, and I intend to compare the primary documents of the stories and records of people with disabilities against the formal documents that are produced by the federal government and perhaps the Department of Health. That's a decision I still need to make, but at this time I have a great deal of literature that shows what people with disabilities have experienced and where the gaps are between formal guidance in the emergency field and what people are experiencing on a daily basis. I will begin by investigating the emergency response plan that our emergency team at the UMass Boston campus has in place. I've been working with the emergency management team for several years, and I've also contributed some of the information regarding supporting people at risk on this campus. Along with that, I will be adding the materials that I wrote and then comparing them to what other campuses have in place and what the national guidance says. So the model construct that I am planning to do will be in three parts. First, I'll be speaking to our public safety corps on our campus, which is our local police corps. I'll be speaking with Chief Baynard and some of the other officers on campus to interview them about how they're trained to respond to an active shooter incident and what they think is most useful during their response on how to support people with disabilities and at risk. The next area will be at looking at what resources are available to the faculty, staff, and students with disabilities on our campus. We do have quite a bit of resources for people at risk because that is an issue for a pretty significant part of our campus population. To find out what there is available, what they know about emergency management, and have they've ever had an active shooter incident on this campus. We have not had one, but we've had a couple of other fairly major incidents. For example, 2 years ago, we had a student commit suicide by jumping over the railing in the building in which I work, which had a very profound effect on the entire community. The next area will be to look at the technology. First of all, what's in use now, what could be used and isn't, and where there are gaps, if there are any, in terms of things that are accessible or can be adapted in some way to provide high quality information and support. And then the third area would be to add that information into my synergistic learning theory framework to assess whether there are points of connection or gaps so that I can add that information into my own research and into my tabletop exercise. Oops. Here I'll be using the building of a desktop exercise as the model to be able to assess how well my theory and my ideas are working. I will offer one of these between now and next March. And then I've also have asked the emergency manager here on the campus to work with me to give me feedback and advice so that we can find out how effective this theoretical model works in the within exercises. I have never conducted a tabletop exercise by myself. I've attended several of them, and I will be consulting with our Director of Emergency Management. His name is Justin Comeau. Justin is very experienced in these, and he's aware of my interest in this topic. So he and I will be planning it together. And what will be very interesting to me is not only deciding how to make the exercise respectful and accessible, but also to think about people's learning processes. So we'll be recruiting people from different walks of life that are both members of the campus and also some people from outside. So we get a nice baseline of data. And then I plan on doing a hot wash afterwards so that we get some good information immediately, and then I'll be able to continue working on my research. If we find that we get a lot of feedback that indicates we need to do more work, then I will be conducting a second exercise to test out the new information that we received. One of the main considerations that I will be investigating is whether or not it would be better to create a website that gives the information about the tabletop exercise and other things that I will be investigating in my research, or whether it's better to do something in a face-to-face model. There are a few online training models for first responders on dealing with people with disabilities and those at risk. It seems to me that even though they are getting good feedback, I don't know how well the information is being held by the people who will be doing the first responder work. One of the main issues, particularly in the disability community, is that people don't have a lot of first-time experience with people with different kinds of disabilities. A great deal of the work that I do in the general public is allowing people to ask me questions about what it's like to be blind, watching what I do in my daily life, and I believe there's going to need to be an opportunity in some way for people to get direct experience. Now, as I said, from the research from New Mexico, one of the things they're recommending is that you recruit the people that work with the different communities in which you want to support. So I will definitely be doing that. I'm pretty well connected in the greater Boston area regarding having people that I can count on. But on the other hand, what does it mean to make something available and customizable for communities so that you can create as much of a real-time uh, experience as possible? Even everybody learns from reading books, but we also learn in different ways by having face-to-face experiences. I think in the end of the day, it's probably going to be need to be something face-to-face and practice in the way that we do our training events, so that in people will have an opportunity to think their way and feel their way through what it means to go through an active shooter exercise in a way that people will find out what they need, what they can do, what they can't do, and come up with some opportunities for them to make decisions about what would help them most. Some of the barriers that I anticipate in terms of designing my tabletop exercise and working through my model are uh, the cost, if there is much of a cost. How will different organizations that tend to be community based manage the cost of running a tabletop exercise or a full active shooter exercise? Another thing may be whether or not people from diverse backgrounds are even willing to participate. Classically, people with disabilities are not taught to try to be responsible or to solve their own problems. Yes, to some extent, everybody does that, but we are socialized through the medical model. And what that means is that we're told to wait, that somebody will help us, that we will need to be supported, and that we are perhaps not capable of doing things very independently. Now, what's interesting about what I just said is that in this country, Americans are socialized to basically pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We are socialized to be very independent. And one of the areas of controversy within the disabled community is how much technology helps us be independent. There's a fabulous piece of research that's done by two Australian women, Devorah Lupton and Wendy Seymour, where they actually ask people with disabilities how they like their assistive technology. So what happened is that they found out that the people they surveyed value their technology because it does give them an element of independence and freedom. But even though they respect it, they don't particularly like it because they find that using assistive technology creates barriers between them and the wider community. So quite a few people stop using their technology. One of the most interesting facets of that study is that there was a conversation about whether a service animal is technically a piece of technology. So I voted no on that. But the fact that they even brought up that conversation to me is fascinating. So that could be a significant impediment. Also, if we start looking at the fact that nursing homes and some hospitals, if I go that far, already have their own emergency program in place, and they may or may not want to try a new system because we are talking about a system change. So to do a system change in a large organization like a hospital or a convention center may require a lot of thought and a lot of effort. So I'm considering that that may be an issue as well. And then the bigger thing is that how important is it? How important is it to make sure that the people with disabilities are dealt with in a way that allows them to make decisions about their survivability? When I was in the Middle East doing some work, I booked a tour of Jerusalem, and the tour guide, when he found out that I was blind and by myself, kicked me off the tour and yelled at me for endangering all the other people on the tour. He felt that because I was American, blind, a woman, and by myself, that I was risking not only my own life, but risking the lives of the people that were with me. So that really shook me up because that's not so much what we feel here. Because people with disabilities in this country are generally thought of as being protective or requiring protection, and that can create some ambivalent feelings. So there could be quite a few impediments. I may be surprised, there may not be, but I'm going to have to work through this very carefully. If I find that my methodological framework is viable, I plan on developing a 3-year implementation process. And what I mean by that is that I will be taking this on the road, finding ways and opportunities to talk about it, perhaps running the tabletop exercise, and using that as a springboard for further conversation on the issues of people at risk during emergency situations. The reason I'm choosing 3 years is because of the fact that as a professor, I know that when I'm developing a new course, it takes 3 years to get the bugs worked out and to find what works best and what doesn't work well, and also to have people participate in what the class is about. So generally, it takes that long to know whether or not a course is going to go well and to find out what's most important about it. I'm applying the same uh, perspective to my tabletop and to my theory. I also hope to do some writing eventually that I'll be able to publish about this and do some public speaking as well. In summary, I have asked two people to be independent readers of my capstone thesis. One of them works for FEMA, and the other one works for the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. Both of them have disabilities. They self identify as being disabled. And I also hope to have other people who are not in the emergency management field to read through sections of my thesis and comment on it. I feel it's very important to have a group experience, and what I mean by that is that we live in community, and in my case, I have people who assist and support me, and I assist and support other people. So for me personally, the capstone is my work, but I have to give credit to the people that assisted me with doing the work and who participated in crafting my thesis and conclusions. So that's what I plan to do. I may add more people between now and next March. I'm not sure yet, but I may have a fairly large group of people because I think it's important to have people work in groups and in community so that we can find out what we can do to support each other as well as supporting ourselves. I want to thank all of you for attending my presentation today, and I also want to send out a very special thanks to Paula Thorsland and Marilyn Day, who have been assisting me with different parts of my capstone presentation. Paula actually put this presentation together with me. She helped me with some of the technical things, and Marilyn is assisting me with working with citations. So thank you to you, and thank you to them.
Scripture says, everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. They'll be safe in the nation we've made. I want to sit under my own vine and fig tree, a moment alone in the shade, at home in this nation we've made. One last time, one last time.